Gear acquisition syndrome, better known as GAS, can be a terrible thing, and especially for those who are into electronic music and the machines that make it. Well, we fall constantly victim to all those beautiful and awesome new synths and samplers that come out throughout all the year. Just like any other addiction, things can spiral out of control, and you might get into the bad habit of selling the gear you own to finance the gear that you don't. Now, the problem here is you might end up selling stuff that you miss, or even worse, that you need in order to make your music production. So, how do you get those gas monkeys off your back? Well, here are a few strategies that I use when I start getting the urge to sell all my stuff just to get the next new thing. Hi, welcome to the midlifesynthesist. Let's get started. Okay, so just for full transparency here, I am by no means a recovered synth addict. I am very much in the acute phase of all of this, and I'm constantly fighting the urge to just blow up all my credit cards on gear. How bad is it? Well, let me give you a short example. A few months ago, I got on the hype train and I bought a Moog Subharmonicon. I tried it out, I played around with it, and even though I think it is very special, I found that it just wasn't the right fit for me at this point in time in my life as a musician. You might have seen my unintentionally controversial video about it on YouTube. Well, eventually I ended up selling it, to fund the Polybrute back there. And that was that. No more Subharmonicon. And then, a few weeks ago, Moog comes out with the same freaking synth, but this time bundled up with a DFAM and with a few cool exclusive accessories that are not sold separately. And well, YOLO? What I'm trying to do here is tell you my experience so you don't make the same mistakes that I did and don't end up selling gear that you regret down the line. Blatant hypocrisy aside, there are a few times where I do manage to control my urges and, fight that temptation. Of course, it goes without saying that you should really try to hold off selling any of your music gear unless you're absolutely done with this hobby or if it's no longer your job. It's just so easy to get sucked into this never-ending spiral of selling one synth to afford another, and it's almost immediately and inevitably followed by buyer's remorse and the realization that you're being a complete dumbass. And depending on where you live, you might end up selling a machine that might be impossible to get down the line, be it for the price or that just maybe no one's selling it anymore. So before you start selling your gear willy-nilly, here are a few strategies that hopefully will prevent you from making a huge mistake. Number 1, the 6-month rule. This is a tip that I got from synth forums and other people that had the same problem as I did. The idea here is that once you think you don't want a piece of gear anymore, for example a synth, you grab it, you put it in its box, and you put it on a shelf. And you keep it there for 6 months without selling it. If you can go for 6 months without needing it, missing it, or just having the urge to play around with it, then it's probably good to go. The idea behind it is that usually when you're selling gear to finance your gas-infused impulse, usually that gas doesn't last. Wow, I rhymed. Start a little rap there. If you can outlast your gas... Okay, last time I swear. 6 months seems like a pretty reasonable time period, since if 6 months have passed and you still want that new piece of gear, and in those 6 months you haven't missed the other one that you shelved, then it's probably cool to trade it off. Personally though, I have shelved gear for about a year before suddenly needing it again, and thankfully it was still there, but just so you know, at least 6 months. Number 2, try reconnecting with your existing gear. Sometimes gear that you have lying around for ages can get all the more interesting by just looking at it from a different perspective, or changing the function that it does in the whole of your setup. For example, at one point I almost sold my Octatrack. I wasn't doing that much audio mangling at the time, and I thought that maybe I was done. The thing is, before I sold it, I shelved it for a while, and suddenly, in those months, I started needing an audio looper, and the Octatrack was there. I started using and really digging into the looping functionality, and I fell in love all over again. So remember, just because a synth is old does not mean you can't use it in new ways. There's a saying in my country that goes something like this: better the devil you know then a devil you don't. From reading the manual to figuring out the workflow and developing muscle memory, a new synth can be quite a challenge to master. In that aspect, a synth you know well and have taken the time to master is an extremely valuable synth, in the sense that you'll probably be able to do more, do it faster, and more intuitively than on a synth that you're just starting out on. Third, maybe try selling other non-musical stuff first. Personally, all of my synth and YouTube stuff live kind of like in different compartment of my life. And in that sense, I only trade within that compartment. So if I need a new synth, I'll usually start looking at one of the synths that I own to sell if I need money to finance that. But I often forget that I have all of these other compartments with other hobbies that I might not be using that much or simply have no more interest in. I could sell some of that stuff to finance the music stuff, which is a win-win. Especially if you've just started investing in your music studio and it's starting to take shape and really, become a nice collection. Well, it's very possible that you might have other non-essential stuff lying around the house that you might be willing to part with that you won't miss as much as one of your synths. This might be a remnant of another hobby you used to have, or maybe a hobby you picked up pretty late in life and realized that, well, you're not 18 anymore. Whatever the case, perhaps your music boxes aren't the first choice of things to part with. Finally, if you do end up deciding to sell something in your studio, make sure to look for redundancy and overlapping features among your gear. Just make sure that you're not shooting yourself in the foot by sacrificing a functionality that your other gear doesn't have. For example, let's say that you have lots of synths and you only have one Elektron box, and that Elektron box is the Digiton. Now, among all your other synths, you have another FM synth that doesn't have a sequencer. So if I sell the Digiton, I won't be only sacrificing the FM synth, I'll also be sacrificing the Elektron sequencer, which is a whole thing on its own. Versus on the other one, I can sell the FM synth and I still have an FM synth on the Digiton. So no real losses. Also, a final word to the wise, if you have any synths that are unique or vintage or are very rare to find, hold on to those. First, because they might actually go up in value as time goes by. And second, because as I said before, you might not find them ever again. And that just plain sucks. So that's how I deal with my gas, but how about you? How do you decide what gear to keep and what gear to sell? What gear are you aching for right now? Tell me in the comments what gear dilemma you're in, and maybe we can figure it out together. The community here is awesome, and there's always people willing to pitch in and help you decide. Anyway, if you made it this far in the video, thank you so much. Consider leaving a like, maybe a comment, or even subscribing. It really helps the channel grow, and I really like being here. I hope you found this video useful, or at least entertaining. Have a great week. I'll see you in the next one.